stakeholders in different states across the country, and they are seeking for venue and police protection. One of such group, Take It Back Movement FCT, wrote to the Minister of the FCT, Nyesom Wike, requesting venue for the protest. Another group, Active Citizens Group, wrote to the Commissioner of Police in Lagos, notifying the command of a planned peaceful protest and requesting security support. The Lagos Police Command has acknowledged receiving a letter for protest in the state. As the groups continue to prepare ahead of the planned protest, other associations are announcing that their members have no intention to join the protest. Now, the organizers of the planned protest say the reason for the agitation is to demand economic and political reforms from the federal government. Now, on the program today, we will talk to analysts to dissect the performance of the Tinubu administration, and is a call for #End Bad Governance really necessary? That's our conversation today. We'll be speaking with security and defense consultant and CEO Aquilin Intelligence, Oyekachi Adekoya. He joins us in the studio. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
We also have a development policy scholar, Dr. Jelili Adebi. He also joins us in the studio. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for the opportunity to engage the conversation.
All right, so joining us via Zoom, we have a lecturer at the Department of Economics at the Michael Okpara University of Agriculture, Modike, Dr. Chukwuma Agbona. He joins us via Zoom, like I said earlier, from Abia State. Good to have you join us.
Thank you, Precious.
All right, so
glad to see the program.
All right, so thank you all for joining us. But now let's get into the conversation, because there are about three different aspects of this conversation that I want us to talk about. One is the side of the protesters, what they're agitating for, the response of the government and what he said it has done so far, and then where I think that, of course, not where I think, where you are an expert is how the security agencies are also responding, especially the police, are also responding to this. So let's look at all of this. Let's begin with the protesters. What do you make of the call, for this protest, and what the protesters are saying? Look, things are difficult, and we need to hit the streets. Perhaps maybe the government will listen to us this time.
Okay. I think that if you listen to the president himself, right from when he campaigned that this would be a difficult job. Even during the campaign season, it was clear that whoever won the election had a very tough call to make on certain issues on national development. So there are issues really in terms of economic hardship. But we say in management speak that at every point of change or at every curve, there's always a crisis. So macroeconomic speaking, there's some instability. The headwinds are there. The immediate effects of the policy reforms that the government is trying to embark upon, again, it's a bitter pill that Nigerians must undertake. Some people also do not recognize that this government is saving about 1 trillion naira now every month, as opposed to printing by ways and means almost 29 trillion under the past administration. So we are turning a corner, but there's hardship and the pains are there. So if you ask what I make of the protest, I think it's just a normal reaction by the populace really to some of the throes of the reforms being undertaken. On the side of law, people have a fundamental right. There's a right to protest, peaceful protest. And I don't think that any of the agencies, the DSS, the military, the police, have said that people have a right to peaceful protest and assembly. However, if you look at the language used by the DSS, they had also warned that some elements have their own objective. And it's typical that when you have a movement, some other people have their own objectives, jump on that particular movement in pursuit of their own objectives. So I'm neither here nor there on the protest, really. I just ask that the protest, if it does occur, should be peaceful. It should also mind the rights of other people, because the right of movement is also fundamental. You cannot abrogate my own right to free movement just because you are also exercising your own right to protest. So, I've seen some requests for use of public space by the would-be protesters. I think that is good. If they can do their protests within those public space and limit it to those areas, being mindful of the rights of other Nigerians who may be also going about pursuing their own value, because a good number of Nigerians are itinerant workers. People earn money on a daily basis. If you knock people out of daily living for 14 days, unintendedly, we can create a bigger crisis than what the protesters may be wanting to protest about. So that's my assessment of it. I hold no personal opinions, really.
All right. So I want to, pick up on some of the things he said. One of them is that we are saving about 1 point something million now. Trillion rather now, and he's also talking about we're turning a corner. For some Nigerians who are listening, they are wondering, we're saving money, but it doesn't feel like we're saving money because it's not reflecting on my own lifestyle. What does that mean for me if government is saving money? And so I wanted to also speak to that as a development policy scholar. Why there is that gap.
Thank you so much for that stimulating question. I mean, when we talk about development, it's not just about revenue. Development encompasses a number of indicators. Part of that indicators is the well-being of the people. And it's about the most important thing when it comes to governance, especially within a democratic setting. And the purpose of policy is not to impose hardship on the people. It's to lessen the burden of hardship, development challenges that the people are experiencing. No reasonable person standing an election is going to campaign on the pedestal of policies that will exacerbate hardship. We've had in our cases that we fought to elect a government. I was among those that vociferously campaigned aggressively to have Asiwaju emerge as the president of the country. The truth is this: our policies have exacerbated the living condition of the people. The street tells the story. I've been speaking with people, family members. The cost of running generators, providing electricity by an average Nigerian. A friend of mine who is the director of Baobab Plus, when I visited him, from 20,000 naira powering his house in a month, it increased during the presidency of our principal to 220,000 naira a month. Take note of that. Just for one issue. Other issue, feeding the family. The bill, eating, and even below the regular standard of the family increased by more than 1,000%. Think about that. Schools are increasing fees. Parents have had to struggle keeping up with the bills of financing the education of their children, especially at the tertiary level. So the policies that we've implemented as a government has made the street to hit a point of frustration. And the essence of policies in development arena is not to exist at the expense of the people, at the expense of the well-being of the people. Whenever we implement a policy and there are triggers exacerbating the wellness condition, worsening the living condition of the people, what we do in policy is not to continue with our policy. Because policies are not cast in the stone. Policies are meant to evolve and respond to the reality of the street, to the needs of the people, to the well-being of the people. Our government has not been able to do that. So we have a mandate to tell our principal that we work for, that there is a need for us to go back and rethink those policies.
I want to get to Dr. Bona in just a minute, but let me ask you, which of those policies do you think that, because you've talked about reversing policy if it's exacerbating the sufferings of the people. Which of those policies do you think are not working at this moment, perhaps should be reversed?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's another stimulating question. When we talk about revisiting the policy, it will not be a case of outright, invalidation of those policy or reversal of those policy. Sometimes we may need to interrogate the underlying assumptions behind the policy. I'll give you a very good example. One of the underlying assumptions behind the removal of fuel subsidy was that it was a scam, not benefiting the masses. Some people were just collecting this money. Our good friend, Emir Sanusi, Lamido Sanusi, spoke, eloquently about this issue. But one question was not asked. Which data was Sanusi Lamido Sanusi citing? What was missing in this data? But when we removed fuel subsidy, it became apparent that there was not just a scam, that the fuel subsidy was keeping the standard, the cost of living cheaper in Nigeria. It was keeping it below a threshold that could serve the needs of everybody. That was when they discovered that the fuel subsidy was indeed benefiting the masses in some ways. It's one of the issues we need to revisit. The World Bank, the IMF, doesn't have to dictate for us. Who are the folks in the World Bank? Some of my students that we taught in the university. Some of the folks that we were educated with. We need to listen to issues. We need to talk to professors of economy at the University of Obafemi Awolowo University, locally, who understand our local issues. Otherwise, we'll continue in this.
Okay, I say that, Mr. Dekora, your body language is almost like look, I have to say something, I have to say something. I want to be sure that we can bring in Dr. Ogbonna now, as we get, because he's an economist. I'll come to you. I know you want to respond.
Actually, Dr. Ogbonna apparently is on my classmate in school.
Oh, really?
That's amazing.
Okay.
We studied
so
together.
Perhaps we'll have. Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sure both of you have your reunion after. All right. So Dr. Ogbonna, let me bring you in because Dr. Jalili has also talked about the idea of reversing policies. But we've heard some of the people in this government and some who are not even in government saying there is no problem with the policy. It's just that it's going to take time to see the positives that comes with the policy. What's your opinion? Are these policies problematic, or just a look, it will take time to deliver the dividends?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me dwell on that fuel subsidy removal. That policy is a very good policy because the president has been able to save over a trillion since the commencement of that policy. The only challenge I think we're having is the communication gap. The president knows where he's going to, but he needs to carry people along. Let me paint a classroom scenario, but that's where I'm coming from. Assuming let's say a hypothetical example, a family of 4. They don't have a color television, and the children also want Christmas clothes. It's like for the father to bring the children together, tell them, we don't have enough money to get what we want, but if we can save up, by the end of the year, we'll either get the color television or the Christmas clothes. So when these children go out to see other children who are eating 3 square meals, they won't be disturbed because they know they have a goal that by the end of the year, they will continue. So that communication gap of telling people, and again, economists will teach us that people should have choices. So the only thing I think the government should look at is providing alternative. The Port Harcourt refinery should come upstream, and probably other government refineries. With that impact in our pocket won't be that much. Thank you.
All right. So let's turn to the economist turned security expert. You were listening. I knew you had your body language to him earlier.
Yes.
Let's get your response to what he said.
Yes, I think the problem we may have is that we have too many cooks when it comes to policy issues in Nigeria. It's like the case they say also in economics that it was said that proverbially they asked blind people to describe an elephant. Each person described based on the part that he has touched. Each person correct based on the sensation his senses were telling him at the time. There are the issues clearly of IMF and World Bank. I'll be careful not to share too much of my opinion, but I do agree that there's nothing as a free market economy in the purest sense of it. Every economy must be managed. When the government said they free-floated the naira, floating it to the dollar is a fiat currency that is tied to nothing. You had the Bretton Woods agreement that tied the dollar to 35 ounces of gold following the Second World War, upon which international trade was predicated upon. President Nixon vacated the dollar standing to gold in about 1975, 1976, automatically making the dollar nothing. The dollar is worth nothing. In its purest form, it's tied to nothing. So that introduced a system of fiat currency on steroids. And if you look at global economy, every currency is managed. So to the point Doctor was making, that you don't necessarily and overtly free float your currency. You must manage the currency outlook and outcome. And there's no economist I know that would tell you that at $1 to 1,600, that our currency is finding true value. Ukraine is currently at war. Fitch just rated their currency, I think, about junk now. But the Ukraine currency is trading at about $1 to about 100 and something. Nigeria is not at war. We are still a net exporter. If you say we export mono, compare the total dollar value of the oil that we export to the total dollar value of the commodities that other countries export. You may see that we're exporting services, we're exporting raw material, we're exporting dollar, we're exporting crude. We're an exporter, but we also import. Our balance of, our current account is looking good. Balance of trade payment is beginning to improve. There are a number of structural, non-institutional issues that impair policy in Nigeria. So this is my economic side speaking now. But it's also good because we talk about securematics, the mathematics of security, and you look at economics, how security interplays with the economy. Without security, you cannot have economic prosperity. And more so when you come into advice.
And the other way around as well.
Absolutely. Where economics can have security also, because security is expensive. The good thing about the place I stand from and I sit from is that I run an advisory company. I'm able to make a dimension of, we do 4 dimensions: the political economy, you look at the macroeconomy itself, you then look at geopolitics beyond the borders of the particular place you're looking at. Then you now look at the security framing. So we look from that outside lens in to the issues within the economy. And what I'll say is that there has been a clear case of gross mismanagement. We just talked about 29 trillion naira ways and means. Doctors said that subsidy was benefiting people. I have an interest in importation also of certain things. But let me stick to why I'm here. The subsidy thing was clearly a scam. Those selling, and I wish to be quoted, those selling diesel today in Nigeria at 1,200, 1,150 have no business selling diesel at that amount. Diesel should be trading for about 800, 850 naira per liter, even when you consider the logistics cost of an importation. So if you leave the conditions, to the point Doctor is making, to the market, the capitalist will want to maximize his return. And it is not true, I think it was Adman Sid that said that the capitalist, in pursuit of his own self-informed interests, would eventually work for the interests of society. It's not true these days because the paradigms are shifting, the conditions are shifting. So there are a number of issues. It's not just this administration.
But shouldn't government have a hold on some of these issues, really? Because, you've highlighted, these issues. You know how people, in local parlance would say, after God is government.
Absolutely.
That you can't be greater than government. And so if these issues exist where people, for their own self-interest, are taking advantage of the populace, one would expect that, look, government steps in, have regulation that ensures that people, are not taken advantage of.
So thank you so much. And it comes back to the issue of the elephant in the room. The government itself, in most cases, I'm not talking about specifically the government of President Ahmed Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Nigeria is taking advantage of the people. And there are many factors to this. Look at the history of the people that have served this country in various capacities since the time of democracy. They always leave office where they are than they came into offices. And you keep asking yourself, where does the money come from? And what happens to the situation, the living condition of the people? It has always been the opposite. So when we talk about scam, our leaders are part of the issues. And that is why when you take a stock of the public and private primary and secondary school in the whole of the country, it does not align with the fact that we are in a democracy. Parents have resorted to taking their kids to private elementary school, to private public schools. Why? Because public elementary schools and what have you, they are somehow not assisting. If you want a future for your children, you dare not take your children there. It's just like a death trap. Why? The government is not doing its job. Governors, after they leave offices, what happens? Senators, after they leave offices, the FCC is running after them. So one of the biggest scams that we need to address in our democracy is the orientation with which leaders come into offices with. The purpose of democracy, the purpose of governance is to serve the people.
I like that you said government because it's not just democracy.
So when we get into that,
it's meant to provide public goods.
Exactly. And that is why anytime a policy is exacerbating the living condition of the people, the right thing to do is not to defend that policy. I will now go back to what he was talking about. People look at different sides of an elephant. I trained as a system dynamicist. In system thinking, we look at issues from what we call a comprehensive, broad perspective. When you enact a particular policy, there's what we call emergence characteristics of the system. That emergence characteristics of the system recognizes that it creates a feedback effect. The feedback effect will come back to affect the entire system. My rendering of what is happening based on a system analysis suggests that the intervention that was done by removing the subsidy created a massive disruption. And that was why when you look at the magnification of the suffering in the country, since the time of the removal of the subsidy, and that is why the government is not saying there is no suffering. They have never said suffering has exacerbated since we elected our own principle. Suffering has exacerbated. And what that means is that we introduced the reform at the wrong time. We introduced the reform in the wrong way. And possibly we introduced the wrong reforms. That is what the system thinking will tell you. Now, it now begs the conversation. What could we have done differently? From a system perspective, what we need to look for is a leverage point through which we can achieve the same objective. And there are many ways as to doing this. And the other thing was that, what was the data point? Did you see the data point? Did you see the data point? They were only telling us about the data. That is also a scam. Before you can actually make a policy of that magnitude, there must be transparency about the data, necessitating the fact that we need to take that policy route.
All right.
So there was not enough data to tell us that if we remove the subsidy, what is going to be the consequences on the cost of living. People were just talking about the scam. As a scholar, I know the moment your policy you are making is as good as the data point that forms the basis of that policy. I challenge Sanusi Lamido Sanusi to show us the analysis that they ran that shows that when they removed the subsidy, it was not going to have negative impact on the well-being of the people. I challenge the government to a debate on this.
All right, let me bring in Dr. Ogbonna back into the conversation. Dr. Ogbonna, I want you to respond to Dr. Adebiyi as well when he talked about, he talked about how the policy or how the reform was done, the time the reform was done, and the reform itself. So I wanted to speak to that, and then, before I get to the question I actually wanted to ask you.
Okay. The president took a very bold step in announcing that particular policy because he didn't want to fall into a trap where he was looking for money to run the economy. Like I said, the challenge is communication gap. He just needs to tell Nigerians, this is where I'm going to. These are as in the timelines, and as well tell us at every bus stop, this is what or this is what you should expect from the government. So that's just to me that the people who are trying to agitate, not the impact. They need to understand what is happening in the government. Once the government carries them along, I don't think people will not protest.
Well, does communication cure hunger? Because the issue right now is that people say, look, things are expensive. We cannot afford to feed ourselves and take care of our basic needs as we used to. One wonders if communication can cure hunger, because I remember Dr. Adebi also talking about how, the reform was done and, some of the things that should be put in place while the reform is ongoing. I also want you to speak to that.
Okay, now, the thing is, Nigerians were supposed to have been given choices. That policy should have taken effect. We should have had our refineries should have been working. So since we are not importing again, we now have self-sufficiency. So if that was in place, what we are spending in it wouldn't be as high as it is.
All right. So, sorry, we didn't get the last thing Dr. Ogbonna said because your network was breaking. I just want you to go back to what you said and then repeat some parts of it.
The policy should have come up with choices. Choices being fixing our refineries, more than one refinery, then removing the subsidy. So, if the policy, if the subsidy has gone, we will not be spending as much as we are spending because we are still importing. So if we are producing it locally, Nigerians wouldn't be complaining the way they are complaining, because what you have in your pocket can still afford what you want.
All right, so I know you want to respond, but I need to go on break, and then when we return, we'll continue the conversation. Stay with us, everyone. We're talking about the planned nationwide protest. We're looking at that in line with the president's response, saying, look, we have put together some reforms. Nigerians should be patient to see the results of those reforms. Stay with us.
The Inspector General of Police has met with senior officers to review the state of security.
We are continuing our coverage of the arrest of Godwin Emefiele.
The Senate has summoned the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria to properly brief the Senate regarding the state of the economy.
President Bola Tinubu has announced the total removal of fuel subsidy.
The fresh subsidy is gone. What I will never take is threat.
Let's now bring you more development from Ibadan, the Oyo State capital, where an explosion has taken place. Tell us about this incident.
TVC News, first with breaking news.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Standpoint. We're looking at the planned nationwide protest, and we're also analyzing the president's economic policies, which many say has led us to this point. But the president is saying, look, those reforms are good reforms. Nigerians just need to be patient to see the benefits and the results. We've been speaking with the security and defense consultant and the CEO, Aquilin Intelligence, who is also an economist, by the way, Oyekachia Dekoya. He's with us in the studio. We also have development policy scholar, Dr. Jalili Adebi, also with us in the studio. And then a lecturer at Department of Economics at the Michael Okpara University of Agriculture, Modike, Dr. Chukwuma Ogbonna, who is joining us via Zoom. Thank you all for staying with us. Let me get to you. I know you wanted to react to what the Dr. Ogbonna was saying.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I work with a number of stakeholders in the country, and one of those are farmers. So when the policy was implemented by the president, the removal of the subsidy, I started tracking my farmers to find out how it was affecting their situation. Within the first 4 months, I communicated with trusted friends within the government that Nigerians will experience food insecurity never like before. They called me a prophet of doom. And I said, it's a matter of time before this becomes validated. And it did happen. And I'll give one of the insights, how I got to know this. When you look at the way the farmers operate, they source their labor. Some of them will come from Benue. They call them the Igede farmers. Some of them will come from Benin Republic. During the time of insurgency, we had a drop in the number of farm workers coming from Benin Republic. We were able to source them locally. And that is to increase the cost of keeping laborers on farms in Nigeria. As soon as the subsidy was removed, there was a subsisting agreement that if this labor work for me during the growing season, they request for they immediately require for what they call a shaba, Okada. Okada as at then was around 320,000 naira. And you've signed this agreement at the beginning of the growing season. When the subsidy was removed, the price of Ashaba rose to 1 million naira. Okada. And you got to pay. And there was no way the farmers could break out of that agreement. They were forced to pay. And that was why, after they paid, that affected their profit. And they equally have to pass the cost of the sales of their produce to the consumers. It's part of the cost of production. It goes into the determination of the pricing of their produce in the market. After that cycle, another thing happened. And what we are expecting in October, November is going to be worse. It's not a prophet of doom. We are talking about reality, following data. And I want government to be following data. When government is talking, let them talk data. We must interrogate their data. I don't want to listen to government officials. Communities are going to improve. Where is the data? Government is all about data. Policy is all about data. That is what we do as scholars. We've been collecting this data. Two things have happened to farmers. One, their available disposable capital. Most of them, they have to spend it on internal family matters. That affected the amount of land they put into cultivation. Amount of land put into cultivation will automatically affect the number of produce they are harvesting. Second thing, many of them were not able to hire labor because they couldn't pay for a shaba of 1.5 million, or kind of 1.5 million. And at the end of the day, what they are doing is to cultivate the little they can use to feed their family.
And that's even after the previous government has said that, look,
and that is why
they had done the anchors.
Yeah, and that is why you now come back to the policy. I want to come back to that leverage point. The way you know that that policy that they implemented is a leverage point. Because in system thinking, when we say something is a leverage point, what that means is that that one thing, if you do it, it has a cascading effect that will affect every single functionality in that system, either positively or negatively. Anytime you get that kind of feedback, then you know that you got to do something differently.
All right.
And that is what we're experiencing with this fuel subsidy removal, in a way that it has exacerbated the cost of living in all facets of livelihood.
Right.
As we
so I need to share the conversation with Mr. Adekoya.
Yes.
I mean, you've also listened to him. But the government has mentioned about 3 or 4 things it has done that it feels that maybe in the next few months, 1 year max, maybe things would look different for Nigerians. And one of them, they've talked about the student loans. They've talked about the minimum wage. They've also talked about the local government autonomy, which they feel that if there is a proper governance at that level, Nigerians would not complain. And then I think there is a fourth one. I'm going to find it. I think it's a loan transfer or so, but I'm going to find the fourth. But some of the things they've mentioned. But when you look at those 4 indexes of this particular administration, what do you make of it? Does it have a real-time impact, on Nigerians, and that in a way that in the coming months things would at least return to maybe not normal, but at least better than what it is now?
Yeah. So for the purposes of educating our listeners and Nigerians out there, I want to profoundly and respectfully disagree with Dr. TVC when he talks about about data. I would also ask, what data is he looking at? And I'll tell you why. We support a number of NGOs, developmental organizations, operating in the different local governments across the country. I just returned from Kano and Katsina, where I also journeyed by road, interestingly, between Kano and Katsina. Every day, we issue our field travel authorization support to implementing partners for different development organizations operating across this country. So we have our teeth in different parts of the country. So I should be able to know some of the things going on the ground. Yes, it's true that cost has gone up, but what Dr. Adebi is perhaps mixing up a bit is the subsidy removal and the FX liberalization. What he's pointing to is that Nigeria tried for once to do too many things at the same time. And that convoluted that shock threw the economy into some kind of...
is that a point that you also agree with?
I agree that, to my point, subsidy removal was a no-brainer. It had to be done, and it was done. I may take the next 4 hours to explain to you. I mean, some of these people importing were frustrated with the amount of money they were making from the subsidy by their own confessions, on record, where they said, listen, they fleece the country enough. There are people who bring tankers in, they sign paper that they bring it in, they take it back. All we do is just sign paper and we pay. There's PEF, there's Petroleum Equalization Fund, which means that if you buy petrol at 568 NNPC in Lagos, you should buy it at 568 NNPC in Maiduguri. There are people who collect products, sign papers that they are trucking to Sokoto, they sell outside the depot, they fill the paper for PEF, government pays it, and still people are buying products expensive. So it's a funny thing. Okay? I'm just talking to myself.
It's fine.
So this thing about subsidy, no-brainer, should have been removed. The point Dr. Chukwuma was making was that, hey, Port Harcourt refinery, Kaduna refinery should have been up. They've been telling us it will be up, it will be up, it will be up. We've been contacted by some different foreign organizations to also do some checks on some of these local refinery operators in Nigeria to check about their validity and as to when they will operate. So when the NNDPRA came out and said Dangote is operating at 45%, again, it's not far from what people know. It was at the wet phase of the refinery also coming up. So there are a number of issues. Dangote will not solve our problem. We can't tie the economy to a single source. That creates energy risk. It creates a concentration risk. So to Dr. Chukwuma's point, yes, Port Harcourt refinery should come in, Kaduna refinery should come in. Dangote, who has built the whole foray, the issues between NNPC and Dangote was primarily because NNPC offered and guaranteed stock for which it will use to pay its own share of the percentage you wanted to own in Dangote. The federal government changed the policy, removed FX transfer directly to NNPC, domiciled it in CBN, incapacitated NNPC from its commitment. NNPC could not go forward with that agreement, leaving Dangote in a bit of a limbo on how to get the stock upon which it made its projections. And I'm thinking, if you run that size of refinery, you must also look at your risk. In a policy environment where you have a lot of inconsistencies as Nigeria, you can't predicate a 650,000 barrel per day refinery on a single source. You had concentration risk. So Dangote is the issues are neither here nor there. So Doctor seems to be mixing up the issue of subsidy removal with the FX. Across the world, in the US and UK, the price of energy is going up. But what is shocking us is correctly the point he's making, food inflation. What is causing food inflation? I've been hammering from the security side that look at where ISWAP, Boko Haram, and Saru, the bandits, look at where they are operating. In the regions that are food belts. Forget the other noise that we're hearing. Nigeria is under an asymmetric attack. Because these people are operating Benue, Niger, Kaduna, Jos. In the Northeast had the largest head of cattle anywhere in the world. In Africa, at least. Held up in the Northeast. Now you have ISWAP. They can't head cattle there. There's cattle rustling in the Northwest. There are issues around banditry there. So everybody bringing their cattle towards the North Central where they feel is safer. That creates header-farmer clashes within the North Central coming down towards the Southwest. And the space to farm is being impacted. People can't go to their farm. In some communities in the Northwest, they have to pay Ansaru to protect them from bandits. So this systemic attack, what is at stake here? If you say Nigeria is the most populous black nation on earth, 220 million people growing, if a nation cannot feed itself, the people protesting are not necessarily protesting these other issues. They are protesting food inflation. The key thing is that food has become increasingly expensive. And I agree with Dr. Adebi that the food crisis we face will not be resolved overnight. A lot of communities are going back to their farms. At least I can tell you for free. Some of us are on the roads every day. So farming is going back. But there has to be more effort to address the issue of food inflation.
And that's why I want to bring in Dr. Ogbonna, because I also want us to look at the security end of this, you know, with statement coming from the security agencies. But let me bring in Dr. Ogbonna. I mean, you've heard about food inflation. The headline inflation is also high. What should be the priority for the government at this moment in terms of dealing with this? Because dealing with this, especially food inflation, people can wake up one day and, you know, beans is, for, you know, hypothetically 500 naira, and then before you know it, the next day is 1,000 naira. And that's where people are really frustrated, when you cannot predict, you know, what the market, you know, would look like the next day. Because we used to be able to predict it, but now we cannot. And sometimes it's like 3 times the price when you go to the market.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a listening president. He has done something to this regard by approving the importation of food, which I believe is for the short run. Farmers are going back. It will take some time for the produce to mature and, you know, come to the market. So in the interim, the food import will cushion the effect, bring back the economy to a steady state or equilibrium. So that policy, I believe, will take care of the inflation.
But what other policies should be put in place beyond just food? I know you've been talking about the refinery. A lot of people would say this administration is pursuing a lot of things, and we've seen some, you know, things also reversed. But what should be? Because there are some people who feel, you know, he was talking about the cascading effect, that if you take care of one thing, perhaps it will have impacts on all other things. And so what should that thing be, and what should be the priority?
Now, if you look at one other policy in place is the fiscal policy and tax reform, where they are looking at the taxes and trying to apply the canon of taxation with simplicity, convenience, equity, and those things. So by the time you reduce the tax burden on the populace, they will have more money in their pocket, spend on other things. Then, looking at the electricity tariff, that's another very good policy the government brought in place. We are or categorizing consumers in bands. Those who have the high income earners will pay more, while the lower income will pay less.
But if you're a business person, Dr. Bunna, if you're a business person who lives in a Band E area, for example, and you're receiving maybe five hours of light a day, and your business requires power, hasn't that also impoverished you in a way? Because if you're selling frozen food, for example, and you don't get, because sometimes people don't even get the number of hours that has been promised them, doesn't that already impoverish you? Because the business that you are depending on, you know, to feed yourself also depends on light that you're not getting. Is that a good policy in itself?
Sorry. The challenge we have now is transmission and generation. So if more power can be generated and government expands the transmission, you know, lines and meters everybody, all persons will have adequate light to do whatever he wants to do. So in summary of all these things, these policies, there are lacks in policies. So it will take time before we begin to, not too much time, but very, very soon, we'll begin to see the manifestation of this policy by the president.
All right, so let me come to Dr. Adebi before, you know, as we begin to, you know, wind down the conversation. I know you want to respond to Dr. Ogbonna's statement, but I would give you a minute to do that. But I also wanted to speak to this as we turn to security, you know, security side of this matter. You've listened to the IGP saying we need to see, for the protesters, that they need to see the measures being put in place by the protesters to ensure that, their ranks will not be infiltrated by, high hoodlums, and miscreants, and then hijacking that protest. You were a student union leader back in the days, and you led protest. What do you make of that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Before I dive into that question, about the issue of food insecurity, it's a complicated issue. We have many dimensions of food insecurity. We have the food access, we have the food availability, we have the food stability, and we have the assimilation component. The policy that we have implemented struck every single thing in negative direction. When you talk about availability, it's about so many things. What is coming from the farm, what you get in the market. Availability does not equally equate affordability. Affordability is part of access. There was an Uber driver that I took, and I speak with him. He said, bros, I said, how do you feed yourself? He said, it seems to be 1,500 naira per meal. He said, with the situation of things, and having to keep with the payment of the car he's using for Uber, he got to cut things down to 500 naira per meal. In that situation, it means that he's having the issue of affordability. And that affordability comes back to our policy as impaired his earning power and disposable capital. And that is why that policy, one of the things we need to go and refuse, and I trust that Chuadu will listen to some of us. He needs to refuse the policy. We'll come back to that, and that's another, that can be an entire conversation on its own. And when it comes to the protests, one, I believe Mr. President is not saying that he should not hold the protest. Because first, it's a creation of protest himself. The personality called Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is a creation of protest. Everything about him. He protested decisions he was never satisfied with. He protested military oligarchy, autocracy. He did all of this. He even protested in our own democracies. And one of the things he did during the democratic era was to ensure that the protests were successful. And I experienced this when I led student protests. One, every single time I led a protest, I always remember there were protests that went chaotic at the University of Lagos. I have my own insiders, my trusted allies. They are directors of companies now. I will hold a meeting with them before we go to protest. I want you to provide security. We know all the major places where chaos can come in when we lead a protest. My guys will be on guard to monitor it. This is what I expect the government to be discussing with the protesters. What are the measures you are putting in place to ensure that what the IGP has but now the way the government is making it look, making it appear, they make it look like a big deal. They invite this imam today, they invite another pastor come tomorrow.
Let me share the conversation. We have just about 5 minutes or even less than that left. This is your tough. Again, being an economist turned security expert. Speak to us about this. Government has talked about foreign mercenaries. They've talked about, intelligence of people who are planning to disrupt the nation. They've asked the protesters to provide measures. And people are wondering, this should be the job of the security and not necessarily the protesters. But what do you make of it?
In terms of the security statistics, the security situation, surprisingly, is not abating. The numbers of fatalities yet to date, if you compare with 2023, even as at this date, we are trending higher than 2023. Wow. And in terms of the incident count, surprisingly also, there's been an uptick in IEDs, issues of IEDs in the Northeast. There were some issues in Ngala yesterday. There were some issues picked up in Maiduguri. Again, so let me speak to security. Because the previous administration had considerably decimated both the armed bandits and ISWAP and Boko Haram, some of these elements are now resorting to blackmail, as it were, opportunistic attack. They now have the Boko Haram faction. There's one that is led by Bakura. There's another one led by, I've forgotten the guy's name, who announced sometime in August that they begin to deploy IEDs. So we're seeing an increase in. So some of that will make people think that the matter is still there, but it's really not there. Some of those issues are going down because if you listen to Ndume, former chief Senate whip, a lot of farmers are being resettled. So there's some progress, but the population of Nigeria is increasing every year. The dynamics also are becoming a bit more fluid every year. It's hydra-headed. So I don't take it out of place as a security person when I see government exercise caution. We usually say in language, out of an abundance of caution. The government is bound to take some of these steps. Why? Because in the world today, there is now what you call a protest culture. Europe, people are protesting. In the UK, in Leeds, in London, the other day, protests. In Bangladesh, there's been massive protests. In Kenya.
Even in France.
Even in France also, there are still the throes of protests. And what happens is that a peaceful protest can quickly devolve into a mob. And then you go from civil, public protest to civil disorder, civil disobedience. And then you break down law and order. So government is within its rights to be sounding the note of caution, as the protesters are within their rights to a peaceful protest.
But if you just provide, if you just, I have about 30 seconds left.
Yes, let me just make it.
If you just provide security, some say, look, if you just go there to de-escalate, provide the security, you're bound to have a peaceful protest.
It is not enough. Note the language in the text of the DSS. They have made provisions to charge people with treason because they've said some elements within the protest are seeking to destabilize the government and throw Nigeria into a chaos. And that in pursuit of the integrity of Nigeria, pursuit of the constitutional powers given to them, they may resort to force, depending on the scenario that evolve. So that's also a note of caution. Government is doing what it should do. The protesters should do what they need to do, but they should do it peacefully.
All right. We do have to go. I know that everyone wants to contribute. Dr. Gbona, my apologies for not getting your final word on this, but I've been told that we have to go. Security and Defense Consultant and CEO Aqualane Intelligence, Oyekachi Adekoya, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Development Policy Scholar Dr. Jalili Adebiyi, thank you so much for your time. And Lecturer, Department of Economics at the Michael Okpara University of Agriculture, Modike, Dr. Chukwuma Gbona, also thank you so much for your time, everyone. This conversation definitely continues. TVC, you know that we will continue to monitor the situation and bring you analysis and updates as well. That's Standpoint this week. Remember, you can watch the repeat broadcast at 11 p.m. tonight and 5 a.m. On Sunday morning. I am Precious Amayo. Thanks for watching.
There is always more to a story than the screaming headline. The part of a story that is not told casts a shadow. It's like the part of an object that is not reached by light. On TVC News, I'm able to explore the many angles there are to a story, talking to stakeholders, asking the difficult questions, and digging for facts. I believe the viewers are able to make a better decision if they're well informed and understand not just a part, but the complete story. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Get ready to dive into the world of the Nigerian Navy as Nigerian Navy in Focus, a captivating TV program, takes you deep into the heart of the activities of the nation's maritime centennial. Join us as we navigate the waters alongside the brave men and women of the Nigerian Navy who have dedicated their lives to this noble cause. Their hopes, dreams, sacrifices, and triumphs. Experience their courage, their resilience, and their unwavering commitment to serving the nation and protecting her waters and relentless pursuit of safeguarding our maritime borders. Let Nigerian Navy in Focus transport you to the seas, where bravery meets honor and the depths hold countless untold stories. Don't miss out on this unmissable TV experience. It is the Nigerian Navy in Focus, every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. on Television Continental TVC.
Also known as the Ya Shantiwa War, was led by Queen Mother Nana Ya Shantiwa with an army of about 5,000. During the fighting, Queen Yashantiwa and 15 other closest advisors were captured, and they too were sent into exile to the Seychelles. Her dream for an Ashanti independence from colonial rule was realized on 6 March 1957, when the Ashanti Protectorate gained independence as part of Ghana. Ghana was the first African nation in West Africa to achieve this feat. She was a successful farmer and mother, an intellectual, a politician, a human rights activist, a queen, and a war leader. Nana Yashantiwa died in exile in the Seychelles on 17th October 1921.
At TVC News, wherever the big news story is happening, we're geared up to break it. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Doubt and fear doesn't occur at the canvas, it shows in the canvas. It shows the conation of raw earthen material slabbed, stroked and molded at a pace provided by the doubt and fear. Every move way in the struggle of one to the other, merging the past to the present, brushstrokes of colors seen but not known. For when the wailing stops, the pieces settle down in abject beauty erected for a century of a century. Speaking, advocating, protesting as the arts are meant to be.
Her the most incompetent, unpopular, and far-left vice president in American history. Details in this report.
During his remarks, the former president announced the launch of the new coalition, Believers for Trump. He also said that he officially defeated President Biden when he dropped out of the race 5 days ago, mentioning that putting Kamala Harris in his place is a coup by the Democrats.
We want to put somebody else in. How about that? It's like a prize fighter. He's losing badly, ready to be knocked out. And they say, well, wait, let's stop the fight. Let's put somebody else in. It doesn't work that way, and it's not supposed to work that way. And this really was a coup by the Democrats. This was a coup, nothing else. He got 14 million votes. I hate to stick up for Biden, but, you know, he didn't want to do what he did. He said, I'll never go out. I'll never, ever go out. 2 days later, I'm proud to go out. Because the fascists went after him. They threatened him with the 25th Amendment. They said, we can do it the nice way or we can do it the hard way, Joe. That's what happened. I know as many people on that side as I know on our side, so to speak. But that's what happened. They said, we can do it the hard way. We can do it the easy way. 25th Amendment if you don't go. And he said, oh, I'll go.
The former president urged attendees at the faith-themed event to vote early, vote absentee, and vote on election day. Mr. Trump and other Republicans have long sought to blame Kamala Harris for illegal immigration, characterizing her as President Biden's border czar.
Strongly fought to defund the police and the radical left Democrat Party. We're going to take back that very beautiful White House and we're going to make America great again, guaranteed, and it's going to go fast. With your vote, I will defend religious liberty in all of its forms. I will protect Christians in our schools, in our military, in our government. in our workplaces, in our hospitals, and in our public square. And I will also protect other religions. We want that, right? Other religions. And we will bring our country back together, one nation under God.
Turning Point is a social welfare group founded in 2019 with a mission to embolden the conservative base through grassroots activism and provide voters with the necessary resources to elect true conservative leaders. In other news, Vice President Kamala Harris officially signed the forms declaring her candidacy for president on Friday. This comes after President Biden dropped from the race on Sunday, the 21st of July. Mr. Biden endorsed Kamala Harris as Democratic nominee, as did former President Barack Obama.
To the hills of Tennessee.
And hours before the Believers Summit, former President Donald Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the first such meeting between the two men since he left the White House more than 3 years ago. The meeting at Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence was requested by Benjamin Netanyahu, and it comes on the heels of the Prime Minister's address to Congress and meetings with President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House. Friday marks an opportunity for Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu to reset relations at a critical moment in both the war between Israel and Hamas and the 2024 election cycle.
Well, we're trying to get one, and I think to the extent that Hamas understands that there's no daylight between Israel and the United States, that expedites the deal, and I would hope that those comments don't change that.
We've had a good relationship. I was very good to Israel, better than any president's ever been. And we did so many Golan Heights. We did Jerusalem, the capital. We actually built the embassy at Jerusalem, and the Iran nuclear deal. Unfortunately, the Biden administration didn't do anything. We terminated the Iran nuclear deal, which was a tremendous thing, maybe the best thing that I did for Israel, but unfortunately the Biden administration didn't do anything about it. We could have had a deal 1 week after the election. We would have had a deal with Iran, and everybody would have been happy, but they didn't do anything with it.
In the meantime, the FBI said Friday that Donald Trump was hit by a bullet or fragment from one fired by the would-be assassin at his Pennsylvania rally earlier this month. The department's confirmation that the former president was struck in the air by a bullet marks its latest attempt to quell a political uproar. The new statement is the most direct yet from federal law enforcement about Mr. Trump's injury, though it changes little in practical terms. Some law enforcement officials, including the FBI Director Christopher Wray